Hi everyone. Welcome to another session of Learning Together. I am Christian and this is Language Curriculum class. In this session, we are going to talk about syllabus design and curriculum development in language teaching. The approach to syllabus design outlined in our previous discussion was largely sufficient to support language teaching up to the 1950s. This consisted of a focus on general English using materials graded for their vocabulary level and linguistic difficulty. English was taught through its structure and vocabulary. However, the teaching of English as a second or foreign language became an increasingly important activity after World War II. Immigrants, refugees, and foreign students generated a huge demand for English courses. The role of English as a language of international communication had expanded rapidly by the 1950s. There was much greater mobility of peoples as a result of growth in air travel and international tourism. English was increasingly important in international trade and commerce. The role of English was supported by the growth of radio, film, and television. All of these developments supported the need for a practical command of English for people in many parts of the world rather than an academic mastery of the language as one might acquire in a typical school course. The initial response of the English language teaching profession was to explore new directions in methodology. It was assumed that in order to meet the changing needs of language learners, more up-to-date teaching methods were needed that reflected the latest understandings of the nature of language and of language learning. This came the situational approach or the structural situational approach or situational language teaching and was the mainstream teaching method in British language teaching circles from the 1950s. Where meaningful presentation of structures in contexts through the use of situations to contextualize new teaching points according to its structural/grammatical syllabus. In the United States in the 1960s, language teaching was also under the sway of a powerful method, the audiolingual method, which provided the basis for a structural/grammatical syllabus and a teaching approach that drew heavily on the theory of behaviorism. Language learning was thought to depend on habits that could be established by repetition. However, a missing element in the enthusiasm for new methods was a consideration of the extent to which teaching methods addressed learners' needs. The upsurge in English language teaching since the mid-1950s was accompanied by the introduction of new methods and materials in the classroom, particularly during the 1960s. These changes were often radical and can be called a language teaching revolution, but this revolution has taken little account of the situation or motivation of the learners. One response to this concern was a re-evaluation of language teaching policy in many European countries in the 1970s with a view to determine such things as which foreign languages should be taught in the school system. It was during this period that communicative language teaching, CLT, emerged as a new direction for language teaching. And it attracted widespread interest and enthusiasm as a way of moving language teaching beyond an obsession with the latest teaching methods and to a re-examination of basic assumptions about the goals, nature, and processes of language teaching. The concern to make language courses more relevant to learners' needs also led during this period to the emergence of the Languages for Specific Purposes, LSP, movement, known in English language teaching circles as ESP or English for Specific Purposes. In contrast to students learning English for general purposes for whom mastery of the language for its own sake or in order to pass a general examination is the primary goal, the ESP student is usually studying English in order to carry out a particular role, such as that of a foreign student in an English medium university, flight attendant, mechanic, doctor, and/or other professionals. Throughout the 1970s, the ESP approach in language teaching drew on register analysis and discourse analysis to determine the linguistic characteristics of different disciplines such as medicine, engineering, or science. A register is a variety of language determined according to its use. Register analysis studies the language of such fields as journalism, medicine, or law for distinctive patterns of occurrence of vocabulary, verb forms, noun phrases, and tense usage. Discourse analysis, on the other hand, is based on the analysis of units of organization within texts, for example, narratives, instructions, reports, business letters, or speech events, and examines patterns of rhetorical organization such as definition, identification, and comparison, for example. In social transactions, the relationship between the discourse and the speakers and listeners. These analyses constitute the approaches to needs analysis. The emergence of ESP with its emphasis on needs analysis as a starting point in language program design was an important factor in the development of current approaches to language teaching. From its very core of teaching English for grammatical mastery to communicative competence. Communicative competence refers to a language user's grammatical knowledge of syntax, morphology, phonology, and the like, as well as social knowledge about how and when to use utterances appropriately. In linguistics, there are 4 communicative competencies, namely, linguistic or grammatical competence, sociolinguistic competence, discourse competence, and strategic competence. Grammatical/linguistic competence. The knowledge people have of a language that underlies their capacities to produce and recognize sentences in the language. It is knowing how to use grammar, syntax, and vocabulary of a language. Sociolinguistic competence. It is knowing how to use and respond to language in a given setting and audience. It is the appropriateness of words in a context. Discourse competence. It is knowing how to interpret the larger context and how to construct longer stretches of language so the parts make up a coherent whole. Strategic competence. It knowing how to recognize and repair communication breakdown, for example, using gestures and other communication strategies to sustain communication. As various proposals for the implementation of a communicative approach to syllabus design were advanced and debated, applied linguists began to consider how syllabuses were arrived at in other fields of study and to apply procedures developed in the field of curriculum development, particularly in language teaching. As a summary, in planning a language course, decisions have to be made about the content of the course, including decisions about what vocabulary and grammar to teach at the beginning, intermediate, and advanced levels, and which skills and micro-skills to teach and in what sequence. Decisions about these issues belong to the field of syllabus design or course design. Decisions about how best to teach the contents of a syllabus belong to the field of methodology. Language teaching has seen many changes in ideas about syllabus design and methodology in the last 50 years, and CLT prompted a rethinking of approaches to syllabus design and methodology. We may conveniently group trends in language teaching in the last 50 years into 3 phases. Phase 1, traditional approaches, up to the late 1960s. Phase 2, classic communicative language teaching, 1970s to 1990s. Phase 3, current communicative language teaching, late 1990s to the present. These are done to achieve communicative competence in the language. That's all for today, and see you again next time.